Chapter 3. It's going to be over the Greeks, but before we jump into it, I want to let you know a couple of things. One, I don't know if it's at the beginning of the next series of reading questions or just as a stray one. I'm going to put out some kind of survey with the basic layout of assignments. This week I had a reading questions come in Monday morning. I don't know if that's too much or not. Just move that back. So much has got to happen. Prefer and remember, I'll generally go with, as long as it all get done, I will generally go with think consensus, right? Not every single person. So you'll get some feedback in that coming up. And the second thing is just remember, this is a lot. Just this chapter, for instance, easily could be an entire course. There's no way we're ever going to do justice to covering the entire Greeks. So right now, let's just keep a couple things in mind. One, big picture. Reading is important. Remember, reading changes your neural structures. Right? It'll make it all, if you can get a better reading comprehension now, not only for your other courses now, but especially in the future when you're going to have to think a lot more deeply, it will really help you spending some time now. This is... we'll go into reasons for this in the future, but just it's been proven. Take it in small chunks. This or pretty much anything you do a little bit every day is always a lot better for reasons that we don't still fully understand. If your mind sleeps on something at night, it'll process it. So we're talking reading now, but if a personal anecdote here, something of a hack amateur guitar, not very talented in guitar, but and so I find it to be the case. If I practice a song, say 10 minutes a day, right? On Sunday, right, if I've spent 60 minutes, right, 10 minutes a day throughout the week, rather than a whole bunch of time practicing on Saturday, Sunday I'll be a lot better. Why? That was the business I was talking about. Somehow, your brain, it does stuff at night that we don't fully understand. The other thing for this is take breaks, especially walking, but any break. Try not to constantly divert your attention, for y'all, especially with your cell phones. Right? Use a highlighter, pencil, whatever it is. I don't know if y'all actually ordered the book. If you didn't, use the highlighter here, make your own notes and so on. If you engage with the text, your reading comprehension is going to get a lot better. And finally, if I didn't mention this before, reading speed. All right. So if you find yourself, by the time Aeschylus first took prize in a drama competition, and then you sort of trailing off, try speeding up. All right. The old wisdom, what I was always told, slow down, but I don't think that's really the case anymore, especially with younger people, because y'all have completely grown up and I think even people, I'm middle-aged, my age, and up into old people now, we're just constantly bombarded with everything. So if you get a chance to take a look at a commercial from the 60s, for instance, as opposed to one now, look at all the extra stuff, colors, sounds, just the sheer number of images. If whatever helps you concentrate, right? So just try slower, try faster, whatever seems to work. And also remember, because I'm going to forget here in a minute, the whole book is available. I don't think I pointed this out before. Anything from chapter 3, any of the readings, I posted the ones from Thucydides, but a lot more are available if you want. And I don't know if I'm going to click on them here in a minute, but a lot of our images, not all, but a lot of them, have YouTube links to go with them. So in your response that's due after this, that's fair game. You can talk about the YouTube stuff. That's fine. That's linking off of our book. Okay, so the response is going to be under your book and screencast. Explain how a particular person or work expresses at least some of the values of Greek society. That's what we're about to talk about. Focus on how. You may also include what does not seem particularly Greek-like to you with a given person. So even you can repeat stuff from the reading questions. Maybe it's Plato, maybe it's Aristotle. We're going to whiz through a bunch of the playwrights, philosophers, any particular sculpture, the Parthenon, Theater of Dionysius, any of the other readings that we didn't cover that I was just talking about. There is a lot here to do. If you have any questions about this, just remember to call me or email me or message me through Canvas. Okay, that's A. B is it gets pretty in the weeds very quickly with this chapter. So just let's think big picture here. Why are the Greeks important? And to kind of illustrate why are the Greeks important, let's just talk about Western culture. All right. We know that we're Western culture, sort of. It was attached to Europe, but as opposed to what? Right? Well, as opposed to any other culture. Right? Eastern culture, traditionally Asian culture, African culture, parts of tribes in Africa, culture, Polynesian culture, any other culture that is out there. Right? So Western culture, that's what we're talking about. Western culture stresses different things. For us, it's kind of like a goldfish thinking about water. We're so used to it, we don't notice the difference. So if I give you a short story here, when I was a graduate student, I had to teach a couple classes at UNT. And so if someone was not raised in America, say from, rural China or something like that, right? Say this person was a very good student. The person tended to do things such as this one time I was running a composition 2 all of composition 2 was around the play Hamlet, and then we would critique different film versions of it based off of the play and some of the criticism that we read. So if we got to later in Act 2 and Act 3 in the play, and I told students, put your pencils down, right? And now I want you to fill a page at what y'all are essentially doing, 250 words. Write a page. This is what Hamlet does in this scene. What would you do? But more importantly, why would you do this? Predicated on what you know through Act 2 in the play. Right? Usually, someone from deeply embedded in Eastern culture, if he or she hasn't had time to Americanize, right? Often deer in the headlights. Could be the best student in the world as far as grades, but didn't really know what to do. But yet, if a frat guy comes in late, as will happen at UNT, late, maybe still drunk or hungover, something like that, frat guy's going to sit down, hadn't read a word of Hamlet, right? And boom, I'm going to tell you exactly what I do right now. This is what Hamlet should have done. Right? Why is that? Because this student, usually not as good as the first student I was describing. So, but why? Well, you're running right into Western and Eastern culture. Western culture, highly individual, usually pretty curious. Subscribes to reason, for the most part, even if it doesn't seem like it a lot of times, and so on. We're going to talk about this more, but this basic idea has spread all over the world, such that now, even in Japan, all right, the older generation is still pretty hardcore Eastern culture, but people your age now in Japan, most of your ages anyway, Western, totally Westernized. Right? They think a lot like we do, in other words. And so traditional bowing, right? The group is very important. Don't maintain eye contact with the leader of a particular group if you're a subordinate in the group, right? That's a sign of deep disrespect. In America, we think, well, somebody's got something to hide, right, if they won't look you in the eyes. So this sort of stuff, how the group operates, working in groups a lot better. Typically, Eastern culture does that better than Western culture, and so on. This is what so the Greeks lived on, right? And we're going to talk a little bit about how they lived on this time. So I'm going to try to zip through this as fast as I can. This is a lot of stuff. What may be useful now is if I really zip through this, I'll put an older screencast up. You don't have to watch it, but it'll fill in a lot of cultural or agricultural pinnings that some anthropologists believe led to the different types of Greek civilization, especially Athenian culture. And then I'm going to do a lot more with the Straits of Salamis, right? How that naval battle actually happened against the Persians, just the technology of it and so on. Theater Dionysius, things that'll help you with the screencast if you want to go that route. Or you just want to know some of the deeper stuff there that this chapter doesn't really seem too concerned with. All right, so let's get rolling. Last half of the 5th century BC. Right, our book uses BCE, before the Common Era. It's interchangeable. It doesn't really matter. Western culture I just talked about. That's big picture why it's important. Parthenon here. First of all, I don't want to jump. I love jumping off into this kind of stuff, but it's high ground. It was easily defensible before all this stuff was here. Makes for a good location to eventually build a temple to Athena. Greeks, classical ideal, belief that the quest for an order could give a unifying ideal, triumph over apparent chaos. This waxes and wanes, it's sort of, at times it's stronger and at times a little bit weaker. The Greeks were not always like this. We didn't cover chapter 2, but things in the Iliad or the Odyssey, someone was struck by a stray arrow of Apollo and just sort of fell over and died. Nobody knows why. Well, now we would say this person's certain organ gave out, or the cancer got them, and it got them over time. It's complicated. We understand science, right? But they didn't understand any of that sort of stuff. So a way to get through the day or get through a few months, they got struck by an arrow from some god, right? Makes sense to them. Athenians, their rise to power anyway, predicated off of the Delian League. They had pulled together resources from a lot of these city-states that I will go into in this other screencast I'm talking about if you're interested in. And they essentially stole it. Right? So we think of the Athenians as a high culture, which they were. A lot of the stuff the Athenians did was reprehensible. Way Greeks treated women. No woman in America would tolerate that sort of stuff. Money should have been spent by the Athenians for the common good, was used instead to finance Athenian building, including the Parthenon. Pericles did this. Pericles, big person for Western civilization, but in this case, stuff we would call pretty shady. Right? In fact, Athens was kind of so aggressive. Right? They were the militant ones. We think of Spartans as the more militant ones, and in terms of just fighting hand to hand with their equivalent of the armies they were the best at this until the Romans come along and just mop the floor with them. And we're going to talk about why when we get to the Romans. But the Athenians decided to attack them. Right? I mean, that just sounds crazy on the face of it, right? But it was kind of a naval attack. They would come in, strife cities, get back on the ships and leave. And then a big bunch of ships ended up getting caught in a storm. And there goes the vaunted Athenian navy. And boom, they're pretty much subject to the mercy of Sparta after that. Sparta wins. Sparta conquers. After all of this stuff, great stuff that we're going to talk about from the chapter is done, the Spartans end up ruling here for a while. Right? Not the Athenians, who were the aggressors in that action. Some of the reading question stuff's come. I'm going to talk a lot more about Plato and Aristotle, and especially Hellenism, or the Hellenistic period. But Thucydides, first historian in the sense that we think of history, is a more neutral judgment, not laced so much with the gods and personal opinion and so on and so forth, as much as Herodotus, who came before him. Okay, so here's one of the YouTube links I was talking. I'm not going to click on it now, but if you wanted to write your response about the Acropolis, for instance, well, that's one thing you may want to click on. And it should, or I believe this one does, go through about how, there's not a straight line at this place. There's a curve in there. The Greeks recognize that your eye tends to will make a straight line out of. If it was straight, your eye would make a curve in it. The reason this is so messed up here is much later. When the Turks were controlling the area, several centuries later, as we're going to talk about, they stored munitions here and blew up. Would be in much better shape, obviously. some of this just a smaller building up here. All right, Athena Nike. If you didn't hear, everybody knows about Nike shoes. That just means victory. But right now, I want us to look at this. It's, post and lintel. Posts holding it up. All this stuff's holding it up. The wall too, and flat across the top. Same basic style as Egyptian buildings. Don't think pyramids. Think like a Greek temple or Egyptian temple or something. A lot of posts throughout here. The Romans are going to come along and completely revolutionize how to do this. But for the Greeks, there's a kind of simplicity to this that people still like nowadays. It's going to become more complicated when the Romans, when we cover the Romans next chapter. But so people start kind of looking back to this as desirable. And if I forget to mention this in the future, when they talk about Corinthian or Doric or what have you, or Ionic columns, they just mean how the tops come in. At some point, I don't remember it in this chapter, but at some point it's just a look how it tapers and what they're putting at the top for the style of it. Some load bearing difference, but it's not that big of a deal. All right. I'm just going to ask you to remember the previous screencast when I was talking about that guy stepping forward, the Egyptian. Notice that this is not like that at all, right? Whereas the Egyptians valued a kind of a stasis, permanence, the ideal world. The Greeks are here. This sculpture has power. This guy is just about to launch this discus. Right? We are moving away from idealism, an idealism that had been in place with the Egyptians for thousands of years. Right? Although the Egyptian painters could paint birds about to fly and all that sort of stuff, it wasn't really valued in their high art. Right? The Greeks love this stuff. The Greeks are here with this. Also us. Right? We love the natural world, and when you see a movie, you want people to talk as people talk in life. For the most part, right? That's realism. We went through in the Middle Ages. It's not realism. We're going to lapse. I say lapse because I like realism too, but we switch anyway to idealism in the Middle Ages, where it doesn't work like that. We get back more towards we like the representation that stands for something a lot more permanent or what have you. So this is what I just said. Okay. That's one of the reasons. None of this guy's this would be a spear here that's gone away. He's resting a little bit, right? Using that as a weight-bearing device. Egyptians, not so much. They don't like that. So we're moving. Also remember any of these images along the way you could do your response to if you like. All right, this is going to be a long one, so I'm going to try to zip through here. The sophists, professional teachers, sophists are accused nowadays of being relativists, that there's no such thing as absolute knowledge. This is a no-no now for a lot of society because we value universal truths, right? So the self-evident business in the Thomas Jefferson's, for instance. All men created equal. Sophists, not so much. Right? There's no real truth. Really, it's just what you can argue. They were actually employed. This is not the only thing they were interested in, but how they made money was arguing for usually wealthy aristocrats in court. I got a note on that somewhere. I think that's it. Yeah, help people in court was how they were making their money. They loved arguing. So they're the early lawyers, but they had philosophical interests. Socrates comes along. Socrates wrote nothing. He talked a lot. We do have an idea. There are ways to do this that are way too involved to get into in screencasts like this, but probably the early part of Plato is Socrates recorded. Right, what Plato remembered anyway of Socrates about some of his stories, and he embellished them a little bit because the people are conveniently stupid, and a lot of Socrates, the dialogues concerning Socrates, Plato's early Socrates. But this business here, people always misunderstand this. Socrates eventually is going to get sentenced to death, whether that's serious or not. People debate. The authors of our book tend to come down on that. It wasn't really for real. This is the charge that sticks. This is actually when he gets sentenced to death. Circle of enthusiasts drawn mainly from the young. He's corrupting the youth of Athens. That's actually a pretty serious charge because these are young aristocrats that are going to grow up and do, in part at least, stately things. So if they become not interested in doing that, there is no next generation of leaders. This is, as you read, you can sort of pick up on stuff like this. Is just funny to me anyway. Those he met generally believed, Socrates met, generally believed that they had some wisdom, that their abilities in politics, poetry, or crafts permitted them to expound their opinions about unrelated matters. This is the author of the book coming out and giving you opinion. As is the case today with celebrities endorsing products they know nothing about, right? So, I don't know, football players, actors, actresses, and so on, taking a little poke there. Very low-key poke. It's not over the top, but that's how academics do it sometimes. Plato. All right, so hopefully from the reading questions you picked up, Plato liked the ideal. He liked the idea there's a reality beyond our reality that we're never going to live up to. There is permanence with Plato. Plato tried to preserve something of his master's use, Socrates, whereas in the later ones he used Socrates as spokesman for his own ideas. That's where most of this stuff we're about to talk about comes from. There can be no doubt that Plato is deeply impressed by Socrates' life and death. Theory of forms. This is a monster, but nobody calls it the theory of forms. So huge. It goes something like this, and I think you'll see the allegory of the cave if I say something such as, everybody knows what a cat is, house cat. All right, but there are different colors. There are calicos and short hairs and all these other different kinds of cats. So it must follow that there is some essential catness, right? The essence of cat. Well, where is it? Where is the perfect cat that would embody all catness? Well, Plato eventually, it's not here. It's in the ideal world, a world of forms that exist beyond this world. Okay? That's what the allegory of the cave is getting at in its story, right? That somebody that comes out of the cave is perceiving the actual form, would go blind. Everybody would think this person is mad when he or she comes back because this person would perceive truth, things as they are, and so on. So for us, we say, well, what are you talking about, Plato? That seems bizarre, but probably everyone has contact with this, right? So if I say that, well, we can have a perfect cat, you would say, where is the perfect cat? Right? I say, well, I can't actually point to one. But if I switch it up now, and I don't want to jump into a whole lot of religion, theology, and so on, but this is where the idea anyway, and it never really gets cited directly back to Plato because a lot of this happens in the Middle Ages, and they got problems with overtly citing Plato for this sort of thing. But if I say, who is the perfect man? You go, oh, that's Jesus, right? Jesus to Christ, right? So, boom, everything starts lining up, right? And so not just heaven on earth, right? And so on. You can see the analogies. All right, let's go to Aristotle. Aristotle, not really the opposite, just different. Aristotle, everything, here and now, right? Coleridge, we're going to talk about later, said one is either born a Platonist or an Aristotelian, right? You're either kind of, and what he meant was kind of pie in the sky, you're always searching for this universal ideal, or you're a lot more practical. You just got to deal with what you got, right? Here's what it is. Can you get some sort of order out of it and make some sense out of it? Aristotle the Great systematized. He's founded most of the sciences, most of the subjects. But what he had was a different idea about forms. So he didn't come up with the idea of forms, but he altered it in a way that made sense to a whole lot more people. And as is always the case, people are going to kind of they conflate that they're going to combine together the two. So at times in the Middle Ages or Aristotle, we're going to use this in some of our philosophy or theology at the time, and other times Plato is just dominant. Plato is probably the most important philosopher of all time. Plato postulated a higher dimension of existence for ideal form. There you go. Can only be known by philosophical contemplation, although it sounds on the verge of mysticism there, like that leads to some kind of mystical encounter with God. It's what he seems to be saying sometimes. Aristotle, on the other hand, claimed that forms were actually present in the objects we see around us. So Aristotle would say, well, for the cat, right, it's not that full catness is in every cat. It's that you can see there is some catness in every cat. And so what we need to do is study cats. We need to look at actual cats, not think about, don't need to have a philosophical contemplation on catness. And so that's I don't know, whimsical. That's not really all that serious to talk about catness, but just sort of, you could do it for anything. Tables, chairs, other species, all that sort of stuff. I want to stick with this latter part here. Aristotle argues that the ultimate goal of human life is human flourishing. So the people that immediately jump to happiness, remember that there's a translation problem here. Happiness, what makes me happy? Beer, women, or men, if you're a woman, all that sort of stuff. Right? That's it would ultimately, he goes down that route, ultimately arguing that that's just, you're just pursuing your I don't think, something that would get translated animal nature, and you're just going to end up in bad shape if you keep pursuing that sort of stuff. So I'm going to use the term human flourishing. Think of it as a good, well-rounded happiness, I guess I would say, or what he intended. Everybody's probably heard of catharsis. He coins this term, makes it. He's the one that makes up the term. This release that happens, what he saw were some really great tragedies at the time. Aristotle's influence later on, he was the tutor for Alexander. Alexander starts Hellenism. The Greeks called themselves Hellenes. Alexander is going to go conquering all over the world, and he's going to spread Hellenism that we're going to talk about. And Hellenism is huge. I know that's one of your reading questions. His father, Philip of Macedon. So that's, Alexander is actually Macedonian, but he's going to spread Greek culture because Greek culture dominated Macedon. I'm going to skip over the music's really difficult to talk about way back when. If you're in music, maybe go back and look at all this. Theater, we're going to cover a little bit of Festival of Dionysius. Actually, I talk about this in that other screen. If you want to, you don't have to watch the other screencast, but I'm going to go through quite a bit on the Theater of Dionysius. Aeschylus or Aeschylus, either way, is we tend to say Aeschylus in America. The Brits will say Aeschylus. Oh, I have a big old long story to tell. It's about how the Iliad gets going. When this guy Agamemnon, who's the leader, goes to, he ends up having to sacrifice his daughter, whose name is Iphigenia, to get to the wind god, to get his boats won't go anywhere. Or in the longer story I have, it's called in kind of the redneck moment when everybody piles into the F-150 and to go whoop somebody's butt, and then they don't have any gas. All right, so you got to go sacrifice something important so that he can get the wind. Okay, but Aeschylus, at the end of the day, progress can be achieved only by reason and order. And where we're gonna go with all this is the judicial system. Apparently, that's not the note there. Sophocles, right? Antigone disobeys an order of the state at the time, the king, but he can't bury your ancestor on this much older thing. All right, so tribal customs, familial piety, families, worshiping your dead ancestors, probably the earliest form of religion, and which we still do, but much more primary in Israel. If you haven't heard of Oedipus or Oedipus, same sort of logic I was telling you about before, gouges his eyes out. This is the guy, if you haven't heard, everybody's heard of an Oedipal complex. They say, well, the guy wants to have sex with his mother, or the Electra complex, a daughter wants to have sex with her father. This is where the terms, because they come from these plays. Because Oedipus unknowingly, he didn't know he did that. When he was a young man, he killed his father. He didn't know it was his father, and he ends up marrying this guy's wife and having children with her. So he both has sex and children with his own mother. And when he finds out, that he puts out his eyes with knitting, big old knitting needles. He does it, it's off stage. It doesn't happen on stage. But when he comes back out in this mask that he would have been wearing at the time, everybody is horrified, of course. All right, Euripides. We're going to get to the justice system here in a minute. Well, maybe we're not there. But let's just jump to Aristophanes. This is the one you may have heard of, where he has the play where women decide to refrain from sex with their husbands as a way to get them to stop the war. Right? So it's entertainment. It's really funny if you haven't heard of it before. And I believe sections of that are in this business here if you pull this up. Okay, late classical period. We're just going to keep it going. Keep it going with realism. You can see that there. I know you guys get burned out on this quite a bit, so I'm trying to get through. Here we go. The Hellenistic period. It never really ends. This is what today people would call, multiculturalism. Somebody could think about it not from the perspective of the Greeks or people who had already, like the Macedonians, they're already down with Greek thought. Think about it when you're into what we would now call Israel, which was Judea back in the day, Babylon, Persia, modern-day Iran, Babylon, modern-day Iraq, or all the way to India, which is still India. Right? So some other cultures' ideas are coming in. Right? Foreign influence, and they are moving and shaking, right? Roads, they're changing the water system, they're putting in theaters, all sorts of different kinds of goods come in. People start dressing differently, speaking different languages, bringing their own religious practices, and on the roads, other people that were even closer than where these Greeks are coming from can now sort of bring their gods in too. It is a huge disruption to their way of life, right? How they've been living for thousands of years. So in the Judean period, this is what we call the Maccabean Revolt. If you ever read through or studied the Old Testament, it happens later on in the Old Testament. Get these Greeks out of here. It's this, when we talk about people getting upset with Rome later, in part it was that Rome had conquered and the government had to kind of be approved. You had to pay tribute back to the Romans and all that. But the Romans weren't really deep thinkers, like the Greeks were. It's all this other stuff, this day-to-day, things you see every day that really torqued people up. All right, so it gives these kingdoms here. It goes out all the way out to India. If we go to the Dallas Museum of Art, for instance, and in the Asian art section, you can see in Pakistan, there's a sculpture, and then you think, well, wait a minute, how is that from that section? Well, it was because it was influenced from Hellenism. If you didn't know, Alexander dies very young. One of the generals steals his body, goes down to Egypt, founds Alexander. There are all sorts of Alexandrias. This was the most important one. Big old library that Julius Caesar, it's not clear if he burned it down or it just sort of burnt in the confusion there. Anyway, but what was going to happen is, if you've never heard of this before, museum is coming to the Temple of the Muses, or a museum. So the Greeks, actually, the golden age of Greece doesn't last that long, 50-ish years, I guess proper, that's debatable. But Greek ideas are important, and not only retain their hold, but begin to make an impression on more remote peoples even further east. All right, so all the way out. We're going to talk about the Silk Road later. That's Alexander. So he's what are roads created for military campaigns are later, after all this is done and he's long dead. The people will say, well, hey, now our road's here. We can travel on it. We can trade. We have commerce. And although some people may have went down the whole Silk Road, probably sections of it. People were, and then it would trade for a caravan, say 60, 100 miles past where they were. Okay, that was a lot faster than I thought I was able to get through this. I know I've skipped over something. There is a second screencast if you want, especially more sort of the deep background, more discussion about the temple and the war, right? The war with the Persians that really set the sort of set the golden age of Greece off, right? If this, in particular, if this battle doesn't go well for the Greeks in Salamis, this is what's happening on the other side of the movie you may have seen about the 300 with the Spartans. They were holding the pass on the side of it, where a lot of the bodies dropped or drowned, is the case here. It was in the Battle of Salamis. I hear there was a movie about that. I haven't seen it. I talk about like why that happens more in this other one, but you don't have to watch it. All right, I am going to pause here, and we shall talk.